So thank you everyone so much for coming out and joining this celebration. Alice Elliott Dark is the author now of Fellowship Point, but she is also the author of Think of England and 2 collections of short stories, In the Gloaming and Naked to the Waist. Her work has appeared in the New Yorker, Harper's, the New York Times, the Best American Short Stories, and O. Henry Prize Stories, among others. And her award-winning story In the Gloaming was made into 2 films. Dark is the past recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, and she is Associate Professor at Rutgers Newark in the MFA program. Thank you, Alice. And Nancy Starr is joining us tonight in conversation with Alice. Nancy is the author of 6 novels, including 2020's Rules for Moving and the best-selling Sisters 1, 2, 3, which landed on Publishers Weekly's list of top 10 bestsellers of 2016. And in addition to her novels, Nancy's essays have appeared in the Washington Post, The Forward, the New York Times, and Lit Hub, among others. Nancy has also written mystery stories for young readers, published by Scholastic. And she has raised her family in Montclair, New Jersey, where she now lives, briefly, with her husband.
Let's not go there.
We're not discussing. But it means so much to us to have you both here. And like just keeping on the line of great authors in Montclair. So thank you.
And welcome.
Well, thank you, Margot.
Is this on?
Yeah. Yes. I'm so happy to be here. I know you are too. And I'm so happy to be here talking to Alice about Fellowship, which I love. Probably most of you have read some of the incredible reviews. I feel like there's nothing I have to say that could top everything that's been said, but I'm just going to share a little bit of my experience reading the novel, and then I'm going to ask you to tell us what it's about. So I read the book twice, and I had the exact same experience both times, which is that I raced through it until about 3/4 of the way through, and then I suddenly realized it was going to end soon, and I slowed down because I didn't want it to end both times. Because I love the place and I love the characters, and I forgot everything that happened the second time, so I was just as surprised. There's so many surprises in this book. We're only going to get to talk about a very little bit of this book tonight because there's so much here, so that's my public service announcement to book groups. Plan on an extra long night. There's more than a night's conversation you can have, and there's my glasses. And the last thing I want to say is that it occurred to me the other day that this book, for those of us whose souls have felt a little like curdled or shrunken, this book is a book for this moment, because the characters in this book, the women in this book, and there's some wonderful men in this book as well, are so full of life, and they're so strong and vulnerable and particular and real. It's really a book about personhood that we all need to read right now. So. Good timing. What's it about, Alice?
Well, first, Nancy,
Yeah.
that was amazing. You are a good friend.
That's true. That's the other disclosure, is we've met each other before.
And I also want to say how happy I am to be here at beloved Watchung Booksellers with Margot and everyone else. And I think my name went on the wall about 25 years ago. It's been a long time. And the history of, all the writers in town, everybody coming to do their readings here, buying our books here. It's just so special, and it's a really great feeling in the community. So I'm so happy to introduce the book here, of all places on earth. So the book is about, I'm not good at this elevator speech part, but it really is about 3 different women and the challenges that they decide to take on in this particular moment. Something sets off each of them down a path. There are 2 women who are 80 years old at the beginning of the book. One of them is named Agnes Lee, and she's an author, and she decides that she's going to finish her final book before she dies. And she also is going to try to preserve this beautiful piece of land in Maine that her great-grandfather bought in 1875, and she's now inherited with her friend Polly. Polly is very different than Agnes. Agnes is unmarried, has never been really in a relationship for more than 5 minutes. And Polly got married young. She had 4 children, and she's been a wife and a mother, which I think is a very noble life, and I make it that way in the book. And she really wants, at this point in her life, her husband is a philosophy professor, and he retires at 80, as we professors do. And she wants to finally have a close relationship with him now that they're going to be home together. So that's what she wants to do. And then there's this young woman, Maud, who is 26 years old. She's a single mom. She lives with her mother in the village, and she gets her dream job, which is working at a publishing company on the set of books, children's books that Agnes has written for years. She grew up with these books. She loves these books, and she wants to work on that series. And then she has the bright idea that she could advance her own career, and she tries to sell to Agnes that it would be good for her too to write a memoir. So that's what she's trying to do. And then there's really a 4th character, which is Fellowship Point itself. This beautiful piece of Maine coast that has really been only occupied by a very few people ever. And now there are developers coming around and thinking this would make a great hotel marina, and so Agnes is determined not to let that happen.
Don't tell, she does or doesn't. I just am reminded of the fact that over the years you have sometimes said, I don't know, I'm writing a book about 2 8-year-old women. I don't know if anybody's going to want to read it. And I would say, Alice, don't describe it that way. But you stuck with it, and that's what it is. And people are going to want to read it anyway, so good for you.
I know. I had a really heart-sinking moment about 5 years ago when someone asked me, what is your book about? And I said, well, it's about 2 8-year-old women. And I thought, oh, that is not necessarily the recipe for, a bestseller. But
now you can say it with
I was
full
too
gusto.
far in.
Can you read a little bit of the
Okay,
of the novel? Give us a
I'm
taste.
going to read a very brief. I'm going to read 4 brief parts tonight, and they are, as I say, really brief. This first one is just a brief description of Fellowship Point, and it's coming from a letter. And so it's written in first person. A lot of the book is in third person, but this is in first person. Okay. I parked my car right off Shore Road at the top of Point Path. It snowed overnight, so the ground was dusted and a light wind blew, rattling the iced branches. I came to the bottom of the hill and stood at the north end, surveying the whole point. I looked straight down the full length of the path to the Sank. From that distance, it appeared as an olive-rounded dome that made me wish I could paint. It's an Arthur Dove, for sure. Then I took a deep breath, and the full feel of the place came to me. The pine scents, the bird calls, the booming of the rolling ocean. I headed straight down and checked on the eagles' nests. All looked well, no signs of trespassing or disturbance. I won't check again until after the eagles hatch, if any do this year. I walked by the site of the summer camp and all along the shoreline, and then back up Point Path. By the graveyard, I thought of old friends and older inhabitants of what my father and yours called God's country.
That was beautiful. Thank you. I have to say that I know Fellowship Point doesn't exist, but I really think that you're lying to us and that it does. It's described with such specificity and so beautifully that I really think if you're going to keep it a secret, I'm going to ask Larry. Does it exist? Okay, so the book opens with Agnes sitting in her chair, right? She's, for her 5 hours a day mandatory writing session, And even if she doesn't write anything, she can't leave that chair for 5 hours. And there's a lot of details about her writing rules and process. She has felt on the wall where she pins notes. And as I was reading it, of course, I thought, does Alice sit in the chair for 5 hours? And I like the idea of the felt. So her practices are, how many of them, any of them, which of them are your practices?
She was an ideal.
She was
I would say none of those practices are mine, though I wish they were. I often sit in the chair for 5 hours, but I'm not writing. You know, I'm
That's a
very,
long time to sit
very,
in a chair.
very distractible, very distractible. You know, Harry Styles, whatever. I'm looking around, but I did very much admire her habits, and I hope to grow into them.
Have you tried the felt on the wall? I thought that was
I
such
did
a good
do that
idea.
at one point. I did more. I did ribbon with
What is that?
index cards pinned with straight pins to have the scenes in a row. Yeah,
Oh, I like that.
yeah.
Space.
There's so much about writing in this book. I think that anybody who is a writer curious, likes writers, that would be everyone here, readers of all kinds will enjoy a lot of the book. There's a lot of the writing life in the book. Would you read a little bit about Alice?
Yes.
Would you read a little bit about, I'm going to call you Agnes and Alice. It's very confusing.
Okay. Yeah, this is just a little at the very beginning of the book about Agnes as a writer. She didn't moralize or preach or conclude. The project of fiction was in essence dramatic and sought to reveal what a particular person was bound to do under explicit circumstances. It was hard to figure that out, but when she was able to do so, when after she'd thrown out dozens of false attempts, she suddenly saw exactly how her girls would act and react, when she was able to make her plots ring with the clear bell of inevitability, she fulfilled her end of the contract as a writer and left it to the reader to discover the meaning. She was absolutely sure of her opinions and her worldview, and trusted that they were conveyed palatably in engrossing plots so that she didn't have to spell out her positions. She was a novelist, no one knew. She has a secret novel history. Her potential first editor in Philadelphia praised her manuscript highly, but also dropped a disconcerting remark about Agnes not being able to show her face in Philadelphia after it was published. Agnes hadn't even thought of the possibility that she'd be ostracized. She'd had the deceptive sensation as she composed the book, figuring it all out for the first time, that she'd been alone with it, and that somehow solitude conferred privacy. In hindsight, that seemed naive, but it was quite true that as carefully as she'd worked to make the whole puzzle of the book reach a solution at the end, and with what diamond cutter's tools she'd refined the facets of the paragraphs and made her characters glint under particular lights, it had also not really occurred to her that people would actually read it. As soon as the remark was made, though, it was obvious to her that there was no chance she could be in society and skewer it too. Without hesitation, she asked for the manuscript back and decided to publish under a pseudonym.
Okay, well, that is such a particular feeling that I think, I know I have felt. So do you have that feeling that's kind of a surprise? It's something that's so private when you're writing it that you forget that it's going to be public someday?
Yes. I mean, don't we all? It's like you're just alone there and it feels very private and quiet, and I think that's why a lot of people get into trouble when they publish things that they haven't really 100% understood what it's going to happen when people read it.
And when do you think that moment occurs where you realize it? Is it like tonight? Or you're like, oh, when did it hit you?
Well, it hit me. It did with this book. There's nothing in it that I had any worries about because everything in it is completely made up. But I have had moments in the past. I published a story once where two different friends of mine both said, what is he gonna feel when he reads that? And the other one said they both thought it was the other one. I didn't think it was either of them, but you know, things leak in, so.
Well, that's the saving grace, is that many people who don't intend to think it's them, and others
Right,
don't
exactly,
notice. And so.
yeah.
Did you ever, so Agnes writes these novels under pseudonym, and then she writes her adventure stories about Nan, this very exciting girl, under her own name. Where were you in writing this when Elena Ferrante entered the world, entered consciousness?
Yeah, that was so wonderful, because I already had that.
Wow.
You know, I already had her as being a pseudonymous author, because it's been a long-term fantasy of mine. I think it's a fantasy of a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, to have that kind of privacy and to just be able to go about your daily life as not a writer,
Right.
and but still do it. So, you know, I gave that to her. I wanted to explore it. So it was so fun to see Ferrante come out, and everything that was said about that and thought about that. Yeah, it was perfect timing for me.
Okay, so we meet Agnes, and then we meet her longtime friend Polly. We're going to talk about them later. But I want to talk a little bit about Maud. So, in the beginning, was it just Polly and Agnes and then Maud, or did you know from the beginning that you wanted to have this third character, and how did that come about?
Each of the characters came in one by one. It started out with the character of Virgil, who is has not a big part in the book now, but he was the first person, and he was a musician. I wrote hundreds of pages about him, and then Polly was the second character, and then Agnes came, and then Maud came, and it wasn't really a plan. They just sort of appeared in my imagination, and it took a few drafts for me to figure out how did they all fit together. But with each of them, I think I wrote a few hundred pages just figuring them out.
One of the wonderful things about Maud is, as this young, ambitious editorial assistant, she writes these editorial letters to Alice, to you, to Agnes. See? Can we just talk about that for a second? Agnes, Alice, Elena, Liz Strout, Lucy Barton. What? Did you have any consciousness of that? No.
Not until
Just
you
not
pointed
until
it
you brought it
out.
up. Very curious. Okay.
But it is really
Isn't it
interesting.
interesting?
Yes.
Oh, subconsciousness.
It is,
Wow.
exactly.
So Maud writes these editorial letters, which seem to me to be just the dream of the editorial letters, even if they're not to Agnes, because she's a little prickly about it.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know? Yeah.
She is very resistant
She's
to this
very
whole
resistant.
incursion into her life of Maud.
But Maud, in trying to get Agnes, not Alice, to work with her on this memoir, she sends some questions. And these are the questions that now mean that nobody ever talking to a writer ever has to think of questions, because Alice put them in the novel for Maud to ask Agnes, and now they exist. So I'm going to read some of them and ask you them. So these are questions you wrote. Did you know when you wrote them that
I
this
did
is what would
not.
happen? So if you don't like the questions, talk to Alice. Okay, so this is Maud asking Agnes, and now Nancy asking Alice. Why do you write? I'll read you a few. You can pick and choose.
Hello. Like this?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
There.
Sorry.
Thank you.
There.
Oh, they're so polite down there. Sorry. Why do you write? When did you start? What does it mean to you to be a writer? You can pick whichever one of those you want to answer, all or all.
Writing is, it's the way I live, really. I've just done it my whole life. I think of like publishing as a very separate part. You know, I write so many things that I never think I want to publish. I just do it. It's you know, it's like a runner. Every so often you go in a race, but a lot of times you're just running every day. And I do it like that, and it's been that way since I was 7 or 8, with the exception of college. I stopped completely at the end of school because I just thought people like me never became writers, and I just stopped. But then afterwards, I felt I was way too shy to really get a job, so I thought, I'll go back to that other very shy thing to do. So it means a lot to me. I love it. I love thinking rationally, and I think the most important thing about writing, sorry, I'm trying to get it to the right place. The most important thing is the logic, figuring out the logic of the piece and how one sentence follows the next, how that's going to happen, how to build a case, because everything's a case of some kind or other. So how are you going to build the case? It's like a puzzle. It's very fun and it's challenging, and I just purely enjoy it. When I was younger, I had a lot of struggle, and I don't anymore. It's just fun for me.
So when you're building your case, is that something that happens late in the process, or from the very beginning do you know you're building a case, even though you don't know what the case is?
I know I'm going to be, but I have no idea what it is for a long time.
So you have the trust that you'll figure it out eventually.
I do, and having finished this book, I really feel that I can figure things out. I'm working on another book, and I know exactly what it is, and I know how it's going to end, and I know all of that, but I still don't know how I'm going to build the case. That's a whole other level.
So interesting. Thank you. Can you read a little bit about Maud?
Okay. So, let me find that page. We'll remember that she's 26. So she's in a very optimistic stage of her life in certain ways. She has a lot of burdens, but she's also capable of a moment like this. I'm going to read one paragraph. She's just come out of work from the publishing company where she works. Outside it was June. The air pulled upward in buoyant, invisible puffs, and the entire city seemed to be afloat. New Yorkers had made a tacit agreement to be as civil as the mild weather. In the squares of dirt around the sidewalk trees, flowers bloomed. Dog owners who may have stopped there for relief in February now steered the companions to bleaker spots for a pee. Mothers held hands with their skipping children, and young girls walked three abreast, linked at the elbow. Boys and men made way for women for once. Dachshund, sweater, clog, stroller, espadrilles, Maud named. She rose up on her toes slightly and pushed off with gusto. She'd had a good idea, one that could get her ahead. Her boss would like it, she was pretty sure. She'd have a voice in publishing, in the city, in the world. Tree, police, car, taxi, truck, traffic light. Editorial assistant promoted to assistant editor, then her own imprint. It was all out there, shimmering. Those lists, her mother taught her to do that when she was little, as she's walking, to just stay in the moment, to name everything that she sees. And if she sees something she doesn't know the name of, to ask and find out what the word is.
Great thing. She could have been someone that the reader disliked. She is this kind of inflated idea of herself for such a young person. But you don't. I loved her. I loved her, and I remember that really young ambition of really feeling like you can make your life happen exactly as you want.
Well, especially, I've had a lot of students who are millennials. I love the millennials. I love them.
Uh-oh.
No, I do. I think they're so great. And she's kind of in that. It's like a not being as shy about everything as we were. It's like, yes, I can just do this, and I think work's going to be interesting to me, and we didn't have that.
Maybe it will work out for her, I'm not saying. So in the Maud there's a lot of editorial letters in the book, but there's a lot of other letters. There's letters that Agnes writes to her sister in the second half of the book, and I can't really ask questions about the second half of the book because there are so many twists and turns that are so amazing and satisfying that I wouldn't dare deprive anyone of the wonder of them. But let's talk about this. So there's all these letters that Agnes writes to Elspeth, her sister, and to me, they had the quality of a dream. They're so immersive. They move even faster than the rest of the novel. You leave the current world and go back. And I want to know when you got the idea to include these letters and what they did for you and how you felt writing them, because how they feel reading them is that you sat down one day and 3 weeks later you got up and all the letters were written. That's how they feel.
I don't remember how I got the idea to do that, but I loved writing that part so much. It's presented as letters to Agnes's sister, but her sister is dead. So it's really a journal, but it's addressed to her sister, who was very close to her and she misses, and she's just, it starts when she's just inherited the property herself, and the rest of her family has died in various ways. And so she's alone at Fellowship Point for the winter for the first time. So she starts to write this, and it's most of that happens in 1960 to 1962, those notebooks. And I loved writing it. I could have written thousands of pages of that. It was just a voice that took off. I had to cut so much of it just to make it fit into the shape of the book, but yeah, it was really good, fun.
I hope you saved them, because I would like to read that additional small book of Agnes's letters. Okay, let's talk about Agnes and Polly. So it's a book with a strong women's friendship, but they're 80 years old, so they've been friends forever. Tonight, when you texted about what time you were going to come, and I was on the phone with what I said to you in the text thereafter is my Polly. So I think a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people have those friends who know you from before you were almost a human. Like you were becoming who you were, and they were already your friend, and they know you better than anyone. And you describe that so beautifully. I have a sentence here that I wanted to read back to you, where Polly says, Polly could supply Agnes's lines from afar. They seem to know each other maybe better than they know themselves. So where did the interest in that kind of friendship come from? And do you have one of those friends? I think you have many of those friends.
I have a lot of friends from kindergarten.
That's amazing.
I went to a girls' school, K through 12, and quite a few of the kindergartners were there as 18-year-olds too, so we knew each other very well, and a few of them, I have a monthly Zoom with 4 people, and yeah, I stay in touch with a lot of them. It's really wonderful, actually, and I didn't really think about it. It's so natural to me. Mm-hmm. I've always had a lot of close women friends and girlfriends when I was a girl, and I seriously value those friendships. And in the book, Agnes really takes exception to the idea that marriage is more important than friendship. Mm-hmm. And she gets mad at Polly when Polly is like, I have to go home to Dick. She's like, ugh, you know. And you know, I've had friendships that are you know, that are equal level to, well, Larry. That's not really true.
Friendships where these are friendships that are interfered with because there's a third person in this friendship, and that's the husband.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I really wanted to portray a friendship, a long friendship, and there is a big schism in the friendship in the book. So.
Thank goodness they maybe get back together. I'm not
maybe.
Sure. I'm really surprised. I really did think that Agnes was the driving force. You know, she comes first, and I kind of wrote into the book with her. So to hear that you really conjured up Polly before Agnes.
I did. I had a whole draft that was Polly and Robert Circumstance, who's the person who does all the gardening on the point, and he's actually a landscape designer, but he's worked there forever, so he still does that for them. And I had a whole draft that was just the two of them, and Agnes was in the background.
Did she just, you know,
muscle her way in? kind of, yeah.
Can we just pay tribute for a second to Robert's Circumstance? And I would like to say, if anybody hasn't read the novel yet or hasn't started it, hey, like, notice the names, because they're pretty amazing. I think we have to stop and see if anyone else has questions.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Alice.
Us a favor, since we're in 2 rooms, repeat the questions so that each room will hear it.
Okay. Who has a question? Yes?
Well, I noticed during your discussion that you indicated that Fellowship Point really acts as a character in the book, which indicates to me that really the book has a strong sense of place. And I'm wondering if that's something that really happens throughout your writing, that that's something you have emphasis on in many of the books that you've written.
You want to repeat? I'm going to repeat the question. That Fellowship Point has a strong sense of place, and the question is, does Alice often, always pay a lot of attention to place in all of your books? Did I sum that up well? Okay.
Thank you for asking that. Place is actually my favorite thing, and I have to have a place that I love to write a book, that I want to go to every day, that draws me there, and I just want to be there. And with this, it was over the top, because it took me a while to invent this place and where all the houses were and everything, which was really fun. But once I was there, I would just wake up in the morning and just sort of hypnotically, after I fed all the animals and everything, but after hypnotically get back to that place, and it was very real to me, and it's super important to me.
Yes?
Hi. You said while you were speaking that when you were younger you had a lot of struggles, and now that you're older you alluded to just having much more joy when you're writing. Could you talk about how you got from one point to the next point?
Okay, so the question is that you said you had a lot of struggles with your writing when you were younger, and now not so much. And can you talk about how you got from one place to the next?
Thank you for that question. I think I was very ambitious when I was young for my writing. I wanted to be a great writer, and I couldn't. So everything I wrote was not great. That was just normal, you know. But I did not feel comfortable with that, so I did tons of crossing out. I was mad at myself. I was very unhappy that I couldn't be a great writer when I was 25. Some people are, but I could not be, and I wasn't happy with that. And I think what happened over time is that I just truly started to believe something that I knew intellectually, but I started to truly believe that I could only write my writing. No one else could write my writing. And I just had to love that writing and not pit myself against my own writing. And that really changed everything, and I just relaxed. I stopped crossing out. I started doing things differently. I started thinking about drafts, and okay, this is not going to be a great draft, but maybe, you know, the next draft I'll pick it up a little. So it just became a much more relaxed process, possibly more labor intensive, but relaxed. And that's where I am now. I feel very relaxed about it. I do throw a lot of things away. It's not that I'm a great writer the way I thought I could be when I was young. It's not like that, but it's just enjoyable.
Don't make us say yes, you are. What I want to just say is that one of the things that I felt really strongly about when I read this novel was that, and I loved about it, is that only you could have written this novel. It's just, no one else could have written this novel, and that's just the best. Okay. Yes?
So, Alice, I loved your idea of making the case. Like, that just blows me away.
Lawyer.
Okay, fine, I'm a lawyer. But anyway.
She said she likes the idea of making a case, and Alice said lawyer.
Guilty as charged. So anyway, so can you give us an example of and I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but if you can summon one up, an example of where you were writing it and you were like, yes, I've made the case, or an example of where you were like, no, I didn't make the case. Do you know what I'm saying?
The question is, can you give an example of a place where you made the case?
Like maybe where it didn't ring true, something you did, you were like, nah, just not supporting it, and then there was something where, yep, that's it.
Well, I think it comes together at the end, but let's say one of the things I want to talk about in this book is how people change. All of these characters change, and they make big changes. So the thing I was really thinking about when I was writing this book, and that I always think about, is how can I make a case for believable change? Because we all know how hard it is to change. We all want to change things about ourselves. It's not easy. In a novel, you can make people change, and it can be believable because you're cutting out so many options. You know, you're only seeing narrow paths down narrow lanes. You make them look big, but they're really not. So that can happen. So I think that's really what it is in general, and then there's offshoots of that. But how can I make it believable that Agnes does what she does at the end of the book? And there's lots of little inflection points along the way that build up to it. So, yeah.
Great.
I'm guessing that when you talk about, what's his name, the character you started out with?
Virgil.
Virgil. So the fact that Virgil, it doesn't end up to be Virgil's story means that somewhere along the way you weren't making the case for him.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. Thank you. Exactly.
Yes.
The question is, did you mature through your writing, or did your writing mature through you?
Did Alice mature through her writing, or did her writing mature through her?
She hasn't matured.
Her husband said she hasn't matured.
Downside of having
Still
husband
waiting.
present.
That's an interesting question. You know, as a teacher, some of my students are here tonight, and they have heard me say this, that everybody goes in wanting to publish books and publish their writing, but I really think that just learning to write a story where there's an arc and that makes a case is just such a good exercise for human life. You know, if you can state a problem and make a case for it and show someone changing, it does change you. So I think learning how to do it definitely changed me. I was very determined to learn how to do it. It wasn't easy to figure all this out, but I did. I mean, I can say that with confidence. It doesn't mean it's easy the next time around, because it's a whole different animal, every single thing you write, but yeah, I think it changed me more than I changed it, if that's what you meant.
I listened to a podcast with you last week,
Oh.
Chills at Will, I think.
Yeah.
And you referred to, I hate to take us away from Fellowship Point, but you referred to 2 books that you're envisioning going forward. Maybe you regret giving that away, but are you able to say anything about them?
The question is, on a podcast, Alice, without thinking about what she was doing, mentioned 2 books that she's working on, and Pat has asked if she would share them with us.
Well, I'll say the one I'm writing now, and the other one is I can't talk about it quite yet, but the one I'm writing now is a sequel to my story In the Gloaming, because I've been writing about all those characters this whole time. The story ended, and it was suggested to me at that time that I turn it into a novel. And I didn't want to, because I felt that it would be backstory. You know, it ended with the death of Laird, the boy man, and I would just have to go back and say how cute he was when he was a kid. You know, it just didn't appeal to me to do that kind of a book. But now, you know, that was 1986 when he died in the story. So it's almost 40 years later. Is that right? I think so. So I've, you know, the characters, his parents, his sister, his friends, all of these people have had to live without him all of this time. And he was a very powerful person, and life without him has not been the same as it would have been with him. So that's what I'm working on. And yeah, and then there is another one which I've had playing around with forever. But I just feel like I need to retire before I read that book. It's going to take full concentration.
Alice, so a lot of us here were your students, and one class I remember, and it stuck with me always, you discussed one day that, you know, we really needed to have a burning desire to say something to the world, to put something out there. And that's always been so helpful to try to remember that. When you began this book, what was your burning desire to say? What were you trying to say? What did you want to put out there at the beginning, and did it continue that way, or did it evolve?
The question is from a former student that Alice taught her students to be sure to be conscious of a burning desire, what they had to say, and what was the burning desire in the beginning of the thinking about Fellowship Point.
I'm not exactly sure what the burning desire to say was in the beginning. I think it had something to do with what it ended up to be. Something about our relationship with land and how we need to think about it, which is such a big part of this book. And yeah, and a lot of other things ended up coming into what I wanted to say in this book. But in that first thing I wrote with Virgil, he goes and lives by himself on an island way out in the middle of the ocean, and it was just being alone with nature, and that guided me into what the concerns for the land. That's not in the book anymore, but
But the land is, and the idea of stewardship and who the land belongs
absolutely.
to, very much in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, can you talk about how long it took you to write the book and how you stuck with it?
The
Okay.
question is, how long did it take you to write the book, really? And how did you stick with it if it wasn't quick?
I started this book in 2011, and I had 2 false attempts between my last book and the start of this book. And I really pretty much wrote it in the summers and in winter break. The semesters are very busy, and just, I can write stories and things in the semester, and I do write the whole time, but keeping a big tapestry like this in my head when I'm really thinking about other people's work is not possible for me. So I don't know how to add it all up, how many months it was, but I turned it in 2018, so that was 7 years, and then I worked on it more. I worked on it more with my agent and my editor for 3 more years, back and forth. I didn't even have the ending probably until 2019, the ending that's in the book now. So that was a really productive process too, to be talking to them about it. And how did I keep with it? I was just really interested in these characters, and as I said in the place, I got so much pleasure going back to this place. And I did, every summer, at the end of the summer, I'd write all these notes that this is where I am, this is what I'm thinking, and I go back and read them in, December 10th or whatever, when the semester ended. I would have no idea. It was just, they could have been in a foreign language, because I was so deep in the book at that point that everything felt clear, you know, and it was like I was writing notes in shorthand, but then when I stepped away, it all just evaporated, and I would just have to reread everything and try and figure out what the hell that was. So it took a while.
But it's kind of a good reminder that, you know, you got it done.
That's true.
Got it done.
I
So
did.
For all those people who are like, I'll never get this done, you can get it done.
I really was determined to get that done, you know, no matter what the fate of it was.
It's having a good fate. It's going to have a good fate, continue to have a good fate. Do we have, did you have a question, just?
Of course.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So at what point is it just you, and at what point do you let in other feedback? When you go through your drafts, you know, how many are just you? At what point do you let in the outside, whether it's friends or you mentioned your agent editor?
The question is, at what point do you share your work with friends, agent, editor, other people for feedback?
I show little bits of it along the way. I share work with my son, who is a fantastic reader, and he gives me very frank, son-like feedback. And I showed this book to two friends early on when it was quite different, but they both really felt there was something there. And then that gave me enough to work by myself with it for a few years. But I was showing like 20 pages here and there to friends. Is the voice right? Is this interesting? You know, not like the whole thing, but just getting a read on whether there was something. It really is like, is there something there, or isn't there? Am I deluded?
It's the is it a book question.
Yeah, is it a book?
No.
Is it a book?
So if you're not sitting in your chair for 5 hours a day, what is your writing?
Well, that's a good question.
If you're not sitting in your chair for 5 hours a day, what are you doing? What's your writing process? What's your writing process? Not what are you doing? Okay, it's different.
I do it first thing in the morning. Well, I shouldn't say first thing, because I really do, you know, to be honest, read emails, read the New York Times online, read, you know, do Wordle, all of that stuff for like an hour. And then I start to work, and I just work until I lose steam. And sometimes it's 3 hours, sometimes it's 45 minutes. When I lose steam, I stop. See, these are the kind of things that have kept me going. Learn yourself, you know. Don't push. If you're not thinking well, don't push, because you're going to start feeling like you're not a good writer. Stop when it still feels good, and then take a break, and then go back. I love having all day to do this, and I really feel like if I have 12 hours, I probably get 3 hours that are real. But having all day really helps me a lot, because I am distractible, as I said. I can't write for 12 hours, but I like having nothing else to do, to think about, except house stuff, which I love. So.
One more question.
As a professor in an MFA program, what percentage of writing do you think for a successful writer is natural talent, and what percentage is learned?
The question is, as an MFA professor, how much is natural talent and how much is learned for writers?
Well, that's the $1 million question that nobody knows the answer to. I do think it's possible to learn a lot. Otherwise, I would not be teaching in a program. I would not, people come in and they're very eager to learn, and I've made sure I can teach them. And in terms of natural talent, I mean, some people just have, I think of it as like the gift of poetry. Like they have a way of thinking about language that is just going to take them to places that other people who don't have that are not going to go to. That's a kind of a talent, but there's so many different talents involved in any art form or any work. You know, just the talent to keep at it is a big talent. There's so many things. So, you know, that whole idea of just being creatively talented, I think it's a big topic, and I can't discuss it all tonight. But I think both things, people who have both come in, you know, with both, they can make progress very quickly. Some people it takes longer, but everybody can get better.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Alice, so much for sharing your gift with us tonight, your writing, your thoughts. It was really important to many, many, many people here tonight. And Nancy, thank you for doing such a beautiful job in leading the